Imagine doing a live radio broadcast to millions of people waiting anxiously to hear the news of possible war on Germany. The millions depend on you as their leader, and it is crucial that the message be properly addressed. But because of a nervous stammer, it is almost impossible. This is the story of King George VI and how he made the impossible possible. On November 14, 1895, Prince Albert was born to the Prince and Princess of Wales. The second of 6 children, young Albert was never supposed to sit on the throne of England, but that is not how history would have it, and the events of his youth would play much into the man he would become, and more importantly, how he would rule the United Kingdom. Described often as a frightened and tear-prone child, Albert was not exactly as becoming as his quite rigid, tough, and very stern father, King George V, would have liked him to be. Growing up in the mainline British monarchy had its challenges for the shy Albert. The prince and princess spent hardly any time with their children, as they were constantly on royal duties. Albert was also a very sickly child, having suffered from knock knees and chronic stomach problems, as well as the standard of the time, being forced to write with his right hand when he was clearly left-handed. Having a nervous and shy personality from birth, along with the problems being raised in a family that required him to be the exact opposite of what he was supposed to be, caused the young Albert to develop a nervous stammer. The stammer would stick with him for the rest of his life, and has struggled to deal with his impediment while wearing the crown of England and leading them into one of the most troublesome yet most influential times of the 20th century is the motivation for me choosing this courageous leader for my speech. On the 20th of January, 1936, Albert's father, King George V, died, making his elder brother, King Edward VIII. However, King Edward had developed a strong relationship with his mistress, an American divorcee named Wallis Simpson. Long before he took the throne, both government and Commonwealth had an interest in the relationship, as it was not suitable for a divorcee to be queen. In November 1936, Edward met with Parliament to discuss marrying Simpson. Both Parliament and his Prime Minister forbade him to do so. Even with his proposal of a morganatic marriage to Simpson, which would allow him to marry her without making her queen, and any children they would have would not be heir to the throne. He was left with 3 choices: do not marry Simpson, abdicate, or go against his government wishes and marry her, in which the king knew would lead to his government resigning and ultimately a national crisis. The night of December 11th, 1936, King Edward abdicated the throne, leaving the shy boy with a stammer right into the position he was never intended to be, King George VI. At the time that George succeeded the throne, the United Kingdom was at odds with the monarchy because of the events surrounding the abdication of Edward. All eyes around the world were on George VI as the new king, but more so because there was an impending threat of war with Germany. As news slowly made its way to the outside countries of the horrors that Nazi Germany was causing within its own borders, and slowly crossing these borders into neighboring countries. But how was a king who could not deliver a stern speech to his people supposed to lead England into what would surely be one of the longest and bloodiest wars the world has ever seen? Technology of the time, such as live radio broadcasting, were a new concept and required the king to be even sharper than his predecessors. Long before he was king and into his early reign, George VI had sought treatment from all sorts of different quack doctors, as well as the country's top physicians. He was told that smoking would help relax his voice, in which caused him to chain smoke for the rest of his life. Shoving marbles in his mouth and various other exercises proved useless. On October 19th, 1926, he was introduced to an Australian man named Lionel Logue, after his wife insisted he meet with him. Logue immediately tried to make the Shy Duke feel more comfortable and attempt to let his guard down by doing such things as calling him Bertie, which was only used by his closest relatives. Logue used untraditional techniques like asking the Duke to scream obscenities at the top of his lungs. George was reluctant to many of these treatments, but over time built a strong relationship with Logue that would come into play when the nervous king had to lead his country into war with Germany. On September 3rd, 1939, the king had to deliver the most important speech of his life, declaring war on Nazi Germany. People around the world tuned in to listen to what the king had to say, fearful that the possibility of war would be confirmed. King George VI, with Lionel Logue by his side and millions listening live, successfully delivered the speech that confirmed the fears of war, but also told the country that it was necessary by the grace of God and gave Britain the confidence they needed to fight for what was right. By overcoming his own personal issues and handicap, he showed not only to the United Kingdom how resilient they could and should be, but also to the enemy that England would fight to the last death by and for the grace of God. The shy king that was never supposed to reign turned out to be the perfect man for the job, becoming a symbol of what you can do and not what you can't.